Hello and welcome to this week's Ask Me Anything Python. So, this week's Ask Me Anything Python covers two questions, and we've also got a nice little review of a module for Python. The couple of questions that we've got are basically around handling multiple choices and the fact that Python doesn't have a switch case. The first question comes from Craig Hiskett, and it says, I'm developing some software that takes an argument and has many ways of reacting to that input. As you know, you can't use a switch case in Python. So what's the best option for dealing with problems like this? I've heard you can use a dict, but not sure what to do. Well, yeah, it is a bit of an unusual thing because you come from the background of some other language, or you've seen other people do switch case type stuff in different languages, and then you come to Python and suddenly you're not able to do that anymore. So what can you do? Well, you have to get a bit creative, and actually it turns out to be a pretty good idea. Let's take a look at a little bit of a video that I made to demonstrate a couple of ways to do select case type decision making with your code. Here you go. Okay, so first of all, normally we would handle doing something like a switch case in an alternative way. So we would first of all have a dictionary that we'd create, and instead of using keywords, we'd just use values in the case of this. If we were supplying arguments that were strings, for instance, then we'd probably just use keywords and we could get away with doing that. But here we're using 0, 1 and 2 as an example. So these can be any values you like. So we're using this function here as its value. So if we look back up to here, we've got the function defined just here. We've got another function 1 and function 2, and they've been defined as functions. But as you know, in Python, everything's an object. So a function can be passed as a variable inside of a dictionary. So what will happen is we'll go further down, select or create an argument to that, and we're going to give it the value of 1 this time. Then inside of this statement, we're actually pulling out the method that we want to execute by using the dictionary and using the argument as the key into that dictionary, which will then pull out the value and put it into here. So in the case of our argument being 1, it will come down to this value here, which is the key, and pull out the value, which is actually the function 1. And then we assign it into this variable here. And then we call that variable using these brackets. So then Python goes off and says, is that variable, or is that thing that we're trying to execute as a function, is it callable? And in the case of the 1 function, it is. So that's one way we can handle that. The other way is we can use what they call a dispatch method, and it's a little bit more complicated, but it actually works out pretty nifty in the end. And once you get your head around it, it actually makes things a lot easier to read as well. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we've created this switcher method here. Class, that's what I meant to say. So we create this class called switcher, and we give it a method called numbers to methods to strings. And what that's going to do is it's going to take an argument that we give it, which will be a number. It's going to go through the whole set of methods that are assigned to this class. So you see we've got under here, we've got number_0, number_1, number underscore 2. It's going to go through those and it's going to call whatever method we construct in this numbers to methods to strings function. So how do we actually work out which one to call? Well, this argument is going to be an integer, so we're going to come down to this line here and we're going to construct a method name, something along the lines of method underscore plus a string version of the argument. So in the case of it being 1, it would then end up being number underscore 1, which is this method's name. Okay. So then, if we then go and pull the attribute from this class using that method name, it should then return a method that's associated with that. If there isn't, then it'll come back as nothing. And then once it does that, we try to call it. And because it's a class method within here, it will call one of these methods that we've constructed using the string, depending on what we want to do. So that's a niftier way of doing it. And the reason why that is because later, when we come down to here, all we have to do is create a switcher or an action response class. And then we use that class and call its method with the value we want, and it will return whatever response we want. So in the case of our function, our methods up here, it just returns the string, which we can then print. So that's the other alternate way of doing that. And to be fair, this is probably, I would say that's probably a nicer way of doing it, because then you have the way of separating out these into different kinds of responses, because they don't have to just return 0, for instance. They can do all sorts of different things within the realms of what this class is able to accomplish. Doing it the other way with these functions is a procedural way of doing the same thing, and you could probably accomplish the same stuff, but I imagine it's possibly a bit more harder to read and harder to maintain. So my preference is to go for this one here. So then Chris comes back with another question after that, that basically adds to the whole quandary of what is it that we do after we've made the decision. And he says, once I've decided what to do with the input, I want to send a message to some Arduinos to do some work based on that decision. I was thinking of using a function to call them. What do you think is the best way to handle this? Well, let's take a look at the code that we've already done, and let's see if I can just demonstrate from that code the general idea of what it is that you might like to do in response. So here goes. So once you've figured out what you're going to do in response to these parameters that you've pulled in, if you're going to then send them off, then there's a number of ways you could do this. Going back to our whole dispatch method before, in the case of a function approach, say we had argument number 2 came in, we could then call another function. Let's just quickly define one, something like modules, and then we could do like for module in modules, send message, and then we could do then so we could send a message and we could pass that message in from whichever function was calling that. So in the case of our 0 function, if something like that happens, we could go message all modules switch off as a bog standard message. In the case if we got and number 1, it could be switch on, and then in the case of 2 we could have destroy the known universe. So that's a couple of questions for today. Now we're going to do a little bit of a focus on a module that I've stumbled across and one of our users suggested last week that I think deserves a little bit of time because it's actually really pretty awesome. And if you're developing Django websites, then you're really going to like this one because it does so much with so very little effort. So let's have a look. The first start with anything that's been installed in Django is obviously to install the apps. Now I'm already inside the virtual environment here, so the step to actually install it is just to basically go pip install Django-Postman. Once that's installed, you want to also install PyTZ because that's a support module that comes along with it. After that, the next step is, as always, is to go into our installed apps section in our settings.py and then add in the line Postman, and that'll add in the app to the Django setup. After that, we just basically need to go back into the console. We need to run manage py and then do sync db. And this will basically include the Postman database tables that need to be used along with the Django setup so that messages can be authorized and monitored by the admins, and we'll see that in action shortly. So then once we've done that, we need to then pop over to our URLs. This is the main URLs for the whole app. The whole project rather, and we need to add in this line which basically pulls in the URLs from Postman and allows us to then add this extra section onto the site for messages. And then once we've started our app, we'll be able to see that in action. So here I've created a little section in an app that I've already built that basically lets us log in using an email authentication setup. Now to get to the messages, although I haven't added it into the menus here, you basically need to redirect everything through to the messages section. And then what will happen is it will input you into the inbox straight away. And as you can see, it goes messages inbox. And you'll automatically see a view that's based off of your base.html. And that will then show any messages that you've received within the system. So as you can see, I've got an email here, or rather an internal message, and it basically gives me the text. There's no formatting involved because I haven't overridden the templates that come by default with Postman yet. But as you can see, we can put replies and messages in there. So how did we make a message? Well, if we wanted to, we could override this and create a new message. But for the sake of quickness, I'm just basically going to go to the URL, which is messages/write. And that helps us to do a quick message. Now I'm going to send one to me at my Gmail address. Now I'll put a subject in here of another test. I'll put some text into there like so, and we send it. Okay, now if I go back to my messages, you'll see that message that I had before is still there, but the other one hasn't turned up. And the reason for that is because these messages are administrated, so they can be monitored by the site admin. So if we go into the admin, which I should be already logged in, we can see there that you get a pending messages section and a messages section. So if we go in the messages, we should then see this new message. Now in the status column, you'll see its status is pending. And the reason for that is because we're having moderated messages throughout the site. You can configure it to be without that, but for the purposes of demonstrating how this works, I've basically left it so that you can see how it works. We can either accept or reject the message based on whether we think it's appropriate for that to be sent through. And what we can do is, if I accept it and save, this should shoot off a message to the person who's the recipient, which would be me, and then they will get an email in their mailbox saying you've got a new message, and then they should be able to come back to the site and log in and see that new message in the list. So let's just click save. Check there's no errors happening in the background. Nope. Yeah, that was successful. You can now see that the email turned up from me in my Gmail account and with the message in there. Click through onto that. You have received a message from the user Mike Hibbert, and of course that is correct because under my system I'm using emails as the username, but by default it would be a normal username that Django would use. So if we head back over to the site and we go back into messages, now that we've approved that message to go through to the user, you can see that it's turned up in the list. So there you go. So that's a brief overview of how Django Postman works. There's lots of other features inside of there, and I'll put the link in the comments down below so that you can have a look at that web page and check out some of the other functionality. So there you go. That's this week's roundup of questions that were asked through the site. I couldn't deal with everyone's questions because there were absolutely loads. However, if you do have a question, please do put it in the comments down below because I will do my best to fit you in as best as possible, and if not, just give you an answer on the website. If you enjoyed this episode, then click the like button. If you want to hear more or see more of these episodes, then click the subscription button and you will get an update next time it's available, which is usually about Saturday of every week. Thanks for watching.